forget ChatGPT, forget LLMs, forget even transformers. You've been building AI products even before that.
I don't think we've yet seen the limits of what's not possible with AI. It felt a little smarter than if else. Anytime you come up with an idea, the first question you'd always ask yourself is this even possible?
How has AI product management, how has that evolved over an entire decade?
I think 2025 is both the best and worst times to become an AI product manager. I think it's the worst time because
What Satya Nadella talked about a few months ago, where he basically mentioned that SaaS is going to be dead.
so I would say SaaS in its current form is dead. It's a very complex database wrapper. So we've built interfaces on top of it. A Photoshop Copilot, hopefully Adobe is building this, is where I can go in and say, hey, can you remove the background of this image, add this gradient, and the tool does it.
How can one become a top 1% AI PM in the world?
And it's a very big red flag if someone comes and says, I've heard about ChatGPT, I've tried it sometimes, but I don't really use it on a day-to-day basis. A simple AI PM would say, okay, these are my features. How can I use AI to improve these features? Whereas a top 1% AI PM would be saying,
in today's podcast, we have with us Mr. Akshay Kulkarni, AI product manager at Freshworks, responsible for building Freddy AI Copilot, which is one of the biggest AI products that Freshworks is building, a company which is doing over $700 million in revenue. Previously, he was a staff product manager at Freshworks, and before that, he was a senior product manager at Haptics, which got acquired by Jio. What's special about Akshay is that he has been dealing with AI chatbots for almost all his life, ever since college, and he has been an AI product manager for over 10 years now, before even the word AI PM was coined. And in this video, we talked about how can one become an AI product manager in 2025, what are AI agents, what are AI copilots, how can one become a top 1% AI product manager, and what does the future of software and product management look like? Will product managers exist in the future? So if you're an aspiring product manager or even an entry-level product manager, watch this video till the end, because in this video, Akshay has dropped some serious truth bombs that will help you a lot in your product management journey. Welcome to Geeking Out by Neel. Akshay Kulkarni, thank you so much for coming to my podcast. Welcome.
yeah, thanks for having me. Excited about having a talk about AI.
Awesome. Yep. I think when I saw your profile first, one of the most unique things about you is that you are one of the very few people I think in India who has actually been building very useful AI products, chatbots, if I say, like for an almost decade now. Right from working at Nacer AI, where you were the founding product engineer and all, which got acquired by Scribe. Then you got into Haptic, and now finally at Freshworks, like building like Freddy AI. And I've heard so many good things about Freddy AI, and that means like forget ChatGPT, forget LLMs, forget even transformers. You've been building AI products even before that. So my first question to you would be like, how do you think AI has changed over the years? And also with that, how has AI product management, right? Like before transformers, how has that evolved over, let's say, an entire decade, right? From when you started?
Sure. Firstly, thanks for the compliment. I'm not sure if I'm the only one in
Yeah,
India who has it, but yeah, I think you rightly pointed out I've been in this space for a while. In fact, professionally speaking, I don't think I've worked outside of AI a lot.
correct, correct.
So I think what's been exciting about this journey so far is how much it has evolved in terms of what AI even means, right? Because I remember the first time when I was working on this. So even within Microsoft, just for context, I was
Yeah,
working on some projects within my team where we were trying to bring in Cortana into Power BI, how we could do reporting. So I remember those days, it felt like if only we could have more rules baked into this system so it can understand different contexts.
right.
And it was a very preliminary sort of a system, right? Very basic system. It felt a little smarter than if else, if I had to put it that way.
Yep.
Uh, and building AI products back then also meant a lot of research has to go in. You really need to know what data you're using. And anytime you come up with an idea, the first question you'd always ask yourself is this even possible?
Yeah,
I think fundamentally what's changed now is those questions mostly don't make sense anymore. Like you can ask anything and say, is it possible? And the most probable answer is yes. I don't think we've yet seen the limits of what's not possible with AI.
correct.
And that's been a drastic shift that I've seen, right? Earlier, anytime we had to build a product, it was like, okay, let me see, has someone else done it? What sort of models will I use? Do I have the right data? You still have to do all of that before you go to production. but the barriers to doing something with AI is like drastically gone down.
Yeah. So, like, if you had to go through the entire journey, I think while in Nacer AI, I think chatbots back then would have been very rule based, right?
Yeah,
And even while, like, we joke about these things like LLM or AI is just a big if else statement where you
yeah,
just put if else, right? That was the joke earlier. Then I think from rule based 2017, I'm not sure whether you worked on the Transformers back then. I think it got released in 2017.
yeah,
In haptic, what was that like? What was the AI product management there? And then finally in like Freshworks, where I think you're mostly working on the service, where the services industry, like the employee experience section of
yeah.
Freddy AI Copilot. So, what does the entire change look like? What did you exactly work on in each of these things, and how has it changed? How has the AI product management changed there?
Sure. I'll maybe start from Nacer because there's a very exciting or an interesting project that we were working on when I was at Nacer, right? Which at that point was impossible. Now I think it's extremely easy. So
Yeah.
the project I was working on was with a client who was working with the Arts Museum in London. So they wanted to do a expo on AI where their thing was AI is the future. So we want to display a section where we'll have Steve Jobs, an animated Steve Jobs available, and we want people to be able to go and talk to him.
Okay.
Uh,
Wow.
so, and they were working with people who had built games before. They were working with game engine developers to sort of do all the animation parts, but they wanted someone to build the AI layer behind it because they wanted it to be an open-ended conversation. So people could go up to the counter and ask Steve Jobs anything about his life. And
Right.
the task that they had given me at that point is, hey, can you take all the interviews Steve Jobs has ever done
Hmm.
in just all his books and make sure he's able to respond?
Yep.
The technology to do it back then didn't exist. So the way we
Absolutely.
were approaching this was, okay, let's divide this into sections. We'll talk about biography, we'll talk about personal life. And then for everything we came up with what questions can people ask? And then manually put in these like intent what's typically called intents in chatbots. So
Hmm.
code intents into it. And soon our intent library got so huge, he would like Steve Jobs animation would take like 10 minutes to answer any question, which felt
Hmm.
weird. Like if you ask him what's your mother's name, he'll be like, okay, wait, let me think and go through the. So that was where it started, right? And
Hmm.
that was AI product management back then. You had to figure out,
Yeah.
okay, what are the different type of intents my customers will ask? How can I
Hmm.
essentially structure my AI or a bot into those formats? Slowly moving into haptic, GPT was still very nascent. Transformers had come in, but this was around GPT-2, GPT-3 sort of
Correct.
a time frame.
Hmm.
So you could automate some parts of it away. Like you could say, okay, all the casual conversations, small
Hmm.
talk sort of things, we can give it away. And anything which is to like do with abuse filtering, handling these edge cases is something we can give, which are generic in nature, can be given
Right.
away to bots. But the business rules and specific things still have to be thought through by a PM. And it's no different from building any other feature. Like if you're
Right.
building a feature, you'll have to think of every use case,
Correct.
almost do like a storyboard of okay, this is what the user flow looks like. It was exactly same. So AI and which is why if you also remember, AI product management was not a big thing back then. Like it was not
Yep.
like hey, you're a AI product manager, so you're doing something different. All of
Yep.
that changed from GPT 3.5 because
Yes.
now it was able to take in data in unstructured format and then do tasks on top of it. So now you no longer think about, okay, how do I structure what sort of questions my customers might ask? And I'm keeping this very specific to chatbots because that's
Yep.
my area
Yep.
of
Yep.
expertise. So now you don't think about that. Now what you think about is, do I have all the information that will be needed to answer this question? So your thinking about this problem has changed from how do I structure my UX and how do I structure my flows to how do I make sure I have all the data available so that my model or LLM can use that to answer.
Yep, absolutely. I think that correctly sums it up. Sums it up. Like earlier on, it was so much rule based. Like we have. I have also built a couple of chatbots while I've been working in Super AGI, and like it has become incredibly easier. Like where people have built, like people now build side projects of chatbots which work immensely well, like for
Yeah,
customer service and any of these use cases. So it's crazy how fast things have moved on.
no,
And to like coming to this, like specifically about chatbots, people also I think relate, like let's talk a bit about chatbots, co-pilots, agents, I think people, especially the audience that I have, which are aspiring product managers or entry level product managers who want to get into AI, they see all of these terms floating around in the internet like, okay, I've created this AI agent, there's this co-pilots. So if you could like maybe explain each of these terms so that people get a better understanding, like what is happening in this world right now in 2025.
Yeah. So I think fundamentally the underlying technology that's powering all of this is the same, which
Hmm.
is what we call a generative AI model or a LLM. So what an LLM can do is it can take any question that you ask it with some instructions and try to process that instruction and give you a response, which is underlying all of this, right? And to go a step further, if you really think about it, LLMs are basically text completion models. What that means is when you give it a
Yes.
sentence, it's trying to complete and come up with next set. But how you deploy this has multiple variations, which is what you're seeing in the market. So one popular thing which almost everybody's trying to get into now is called something called AI agents. And the idea here is, can I use AI to do things which were previously done by humans? And the key thing to focus here is on doing. The difference between a chatbot and an AI agent, I would say, is in chatbot, A, it's rule based, and B, it's mostly restricted to giving you a response or making an API call which has to be programmed by some engineer somewhere. What AI agents do is now all of that uh, configuration is gone away. There's no rule-based configuration, but AI is now empowered or is now powerful enough to take actions on your behalf. So you would have AI agents for a hotel where you can call it up and it can get into the hotel's like booking system and make the cancellation for you. There's no engineer involved. There's no code written. There's no API. A very great example of this is the operator model that
Correct.
OpenAI
Yeah.
recently launched, where AI by itself can take actions. It can plan what actions it has to take and actually take those actions. So another word that's floating around this is agentic framework, which
Right.
again is basically the same thing, which is how can I get agents to do things which are previously either done by humans or humans used to configure the rules and write strict rules around these systems. That's AI agents. The other famous thing, which thanks to Microsoft is now all over the place, is Copilot.
Yep.
And the idea with Copilot is, hey, there are things AI agents can do, which they can automate away. They can plan certain things, but it will not be 100% of all the work that's done in the world. People will still have to work in their environments. It can be in a Google Doc, it can be on a PowerPoint presentation. In our case, in Freshworks, it could be a customer support agent trying to respond back to. So people still have to do their jobs, but AI can come in and help you do it better. Uh, I'll give you an example. This doesn't exist today, but this is what got me into conversational AI and AI in the first place. Was in college, we used to have a lot of events like any the college, and there used to be poster designs that had to be done. And anytime you had an event, you had to like create posters and marketing around creating. I suck at Photoshop, so I used to really struggle on. I've tried to learn Photoshop at least 100 times now, but I've never gotten around to it. So at that point, I had my idea in my head, like, why is software so hard to use? I know exactly what I
Hmm.
want to do. And the tool, I know the tool can do it, but there's an interface in between which is stopping me from doing, which just feels so opposite to how software should work. So AI agents and copilots are our answer to that question, which is, hey, there's feasibility on technology side to do something. The human knows what they have to do. How can we bridge that gap? How can we remove this interface of buttons and clicks and menus, which we've sort of created? And that is where copilots really come in, which is how can we help people do their jobs better? So a Photoshop copilot, hopefully Adobe is building this,
Yep.
is
Yeah.
where I can go in and say, hey, can you remove the background of this image, add this gradient, and the tool does it. And this can apply to anything, right? In Google Docs, I can say, hey, why don't you rephrase this in this format? In PowerPoints, I can say. So copilots are to help you do your job better as a person, and AI agents are essentially to do things that you don't want to do and which can be automated away. So broadly, those are the two sort of directions which everybody's taking.
Super interesting. I think what you said about software, that why is software so hard, that actually got me thinking about what Satya Nadella talked about a few weeks ago, a few months ago, where he basically mentioned that SaaS is going to be dead.
Yeah.
And we have been hearing about AGI for the last 2 3 years, people have not been believing it until unless you actually saw operator API do things for you.
Yeah,
And I think that was the ChatGPT moment of 2025, where you could actually see a browser do things for you, and now everything's makes sense. Like SaaS is dead and AGI. So I would like you to like speak a bit about this. Like, what does Satya Nadella really? Because you've been in the SaaS business for the last 10 years, and you've built AI. You understand how the world is going into AGI. So maybe you could talk a bit about that, starting with
yeah.
maybe explaining what AGI is and what did Satya Nadella maybe say about SaaS is dead.
Sure. So coming to AGI, AGI is artificial general intelligence. And the
Hmm.
reason this term is important is so far, and by so far I mean until 2024 at least. In fact, even now, when AI has been built, it has been built for very specific purpose. Even when we had made large progress, leaps and bound progress in AI, it was in a specific domain. For example, when AlphaGo beat the person in a game, it was specifically trained on that particular model. When we got AI to beat someone in chess, that was built for that model. We made a lot of progress in early 2000 on image classification, and like
Yep.
later 2000s, around 2015 is when CNN as a concept came up, which is convolutional neural
Right.
networks. But this is all focused on, can AI recognize images? If you remember, this is when the whole filters sort of thing had started, where people would build AI-based filters. You could change images in styles of painting. So that is where
Right. Yeah.
Transformers and CNNs were sort of started coming. But so far, AI has always been very task specific. Like you can build AI to do a thing. AGI is AI that can do anything. Uh, and the reason people are now talking about it is LLMs are not trained to do one thing. Uh, that's sort of a marketing lie. LLMs are
Hmm.
text completion models and they are
Yep.
chatbots at the end of the day. But I think it was surprising even to the people who wrote the paper and who built this, which is just by building a text completion model, you can
Right.
build something which understands the world in ways we think are only human. So that if you combine and build things on top of it, now has an understanding of the world, so you can take actions on top of it. Which is why people are now talking about AGI. I think still we're very far away.
Yeah.
AI is very bad at math.
Yeah.
Somehow, what that tells me is there's a lot of incorrect math on the internet, and it's learned math incorrectly. But
Yep.
there's still a long way to go. But that's what people mean by AGI. I think we're the closest to AGI that we've ever been, but we're still very far away, is how I'd put it. But I think the scope of what AI can do is definitely exponentially gone up.
Yep. And like, what about like Satya Nadella saying in
Yeah.
2025? But I think as a CEO, he has to say these kind of things to be like optimistic of the future and so that you continue to build for the future. But I think people have been saying it for a couple of years, and seeing such a big brand, such a big CEO finally talk about it,
Mm.
I think made sense for all the startups to again like put much more capital in this and start building in AI. So can you speak a bit about that as well?
I think what he said has slightly been taken out of context. I think there's a
Hmm.
perspective, if you put the right perspective, what he's saying is not wrong. So
Hmm.
let's think about first principle thing, right? What is SaaS and why does SaaS exist in the first place? So
Right.
if you really think about it, any SaaS platform, let's take a CRM system or a support system, what it's doing is there's a data layer where all your data is coming in, and there's some manipulation happening on that data. Like a CRM is essentially sales records, and there's some manipulation happening on that, moving into stages. You could pretty much say it's a database with
Yep.
a lot of UI on top of it on how to do something.
Sir,
So
database wrapper.
it's a database wrapper. It's a
Yeah.
very complex database wrapper, and the reason it exists is it's very hard for users to write SQL queries. Like we can't expect everyone in the world to write SQL queries and get their data changed. So we've built interfaces on top of it
Yep.
where they can go and do this. That is primarily, I know it's a lot of I've oversimplified it, but fundamentally that's what SaaS is.
Yep.
It exists to build interfaces to make database access easier. Now go back to my earlier example of Photoshop and how the interface is now getting in your way, right?
Right.
Like if you think about it, PowerPoint is like online Microsoft Online PowerPoint is a SaaS tool which allows me to create slides, but I still need to learn how to use the interface. With AI, that need might go away. The data
Right.
layer will still be there. We won't need the SaaS interface layer in the middle, and it can all be done by AI in between. So I
Correct.
would say SaaS in its current form is dead.
Hmm.
All companies will evolve into a place where it's AI agents plus co-pilots primarily helping. This whole, I was talking to my engineering friend in office recently, and we were talking about how almost every SaaS tool has an admin panel, which has like tons of tiles on it. It's so hard
Hmm.
to find, so now they put a search bar on top of it. And that's
Removed.
how, and search is too hard, so now we put categorize and put menus on side. So that's how we've been solving this problem. With AI, all of that goes away. If I want to change something, I'll go tell what to change and it'll do it. There's no need for all of that interface to exist. And that is what I think primarily he meant by SaaS is dead.
Correct. And I think you put it very beautifully where every company, SaaS will, like in 2025, effectively will be dead. And every company will have to kind of put AI so that that middle layer goes away. And
Yeah.
that comes about, and that brings me to my next question, where that also effectively says that product managers, like traditional product managers, also have to become an AI product manager to understand data, to understand technicalities in AI, to actually be able to build meaningful AI products. And I think you have yourself made that journey from software engineering to AI product management. But if I had to say, like, how can someone become an AI product manager in 2025? Where like I talk to aspiring PMs, and they are always like, I want to shift from sales, from marketing, from all these kind of other branches to product management, and now AI product management. So what would be an effective way for someone to become an AI product manager in 2025?
Great question. I think 2025 is both the best and worst times to become an AI product manager. I'll start with the worst. I think it's the worst time because it's the most sort of hyped job. Everybody wants to be an AI PM. So that
Hmm.
this demand is heavy, but I don't think supply is yet matched
Yeah.
uh, on number of roles. So everybody wants the few AI PM roles that are out there. But I think it's also the best time because we're all pretty much new to this, right? I've done AI for a while, but the AI we're doing today is very different from what was done 4 or 5 years ago. So we're all at the start of this. So experience doesn't count for much right now. Uh, what differentiates people and the ability for them to become an AI PM is how much of a agency you have to actually try out things, and which is why it's the easiest right now. Like earlier, if I
Hmm.
had to be an AI PM, you had to understand a lot of nuances of how AI works. Uh, that doesn't have to be the case anymore. You can, if you're a curious enough person, you can learn about LLMs, at least at a high level, what it does, tinker with LLMs, play around with them, and build side projects on top of them without needing an engineer at all. You could build end-to-end side projects without engineers. And I feel that's the best way, A, for you to learn product management, because you'll be able to go to the end to end of it, which is identify a customer problem, validate the customer problem, and once you validate it, the building piece is sort of something you can give it away to AI. So you can say, hey, can you just make this web page, and you can run A/B tests on it, run some sort of validations. So now you have leverage to actually do a lot of this by yourself, build these prototypes, build these side projects, and I would say fundamentally that's how you stand out. If I'm hiring for an AI PM, I would at least ask them, hey, have you used LLMs? How do you use it in your day to day? And it's a very red flag, big red flag if someone comes and says, I've heard about ChatGPT, I've tried it sometimes, but I don't really use it on a day to day basis. Okay, then you're not really cut out to be an AI PM because the amount of curiosity and experimentation that has to be there with the pace it's going is very high. So if you're not a naturally curious person who's been playing around, that sort of puts you on a disadvantage.
Right. I think what I refer to is the volatility in which the AI space is moving. Like
Yeah.
2 days ago, Deep Research got live, which is like does insanely good market research.
Yeah.
1 month ago, Operator API went live, which it can certainly do stuff. Then few weeks ago, DeepSeek went live, where suddenly the cost of building LLM models dramatically reduced to like almost 5% or 10% of what it used to cost. And you have to keep up with these things. And I agree that when candidates say that, yeah, I don't know chat gpt, I like, it's making our life so much easier. Why are you not using it? And why do
Yeah.
you want to become an AI product manager if you don't care about what is happening in this world so much? So I completely agree with that. But I wanted to understand this thing where You mentioned that how can one become an AI product manager? You don't have to be that much technical. You can just learn about LLMs and all of that. But in a role of an AI product manager versus the traditional product management role,
Yeah.
what are the like what extra things does a product manager or an AI product manager does, or what less things does an AI product manager do? Like if you compare the roles side by side.
So fundamentally, I don't think much has changed. Like the way I like to define AI, and this is not my definition, I've borrowed this from someone. Uh, a PM does three things, right? One is they define what the product should be. B is they drive outcomes uh, for that. So they orchestrate the business and teams to drive towards outcomes. And they ensure that the business is successful with this product. So those three aspects of it won't change, regardless of what type of a PM you are. But I think what AI PMs have separately is the way you define product changes a lot now. So you have to start moving away from a deterministic mindset of, okay, I'll build this feature, this is how it will work, to more of a probabilistic mindset of, okay, I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you're a PM for Figma. Let's just take a random example. Let's say you're a product manager of Figma, which is a design tool, and you've been hired to build an AI. A traditional PM would say, okay, I'll build this interface where customers can go in and do this. But as an AI PM, you'll have to think about, okay, if I want to make recommendations on what designs can be made, where do I source that data from? What happens if the design is not good enough? What if my suggestions are bad? So you'll have to start thinking of these probabilistic things of, okay, where are the edge cases where there are no suggestions? So that's sort of the first thing, differentiation that has to come in. The second, I think there's a lot of work on the driving outcomes. There's sort of a new stakeholder almost you have to think about, which is data and data management,
Yep.
and also evaluating your models. Earlier, you could have just shipped your entire, like you can come up with the product definition and give it to an engineering team and say, okay, come back with the product. And your QA team will do the testing and do it, make sure the quality is there. With AI, the difference is now because of its probabilistic nature, you're also responsible for doing what are called AI evals. So the engineering team has built a model, they've deployed it. But what is the first thing a customer will ask you is what is the accuracy of this? Where does this break? And that's not something traditional QA is built
Correct.
around.
Yeah.
So as a PM, now you're responsible for coming up with the data sets you test with, what are the and how wide the data set is, how frequently you run these evaluations, and what thresholds will you ship this feature at. So trade-off becomes a very important sort of concern for these PMs. A simple thing could be a model. You can deploy a very heavy model, which takes a lot of time to answer a question, but it'll give you extremely accurate answers. Like maybe put an O3 model versus you can also use a O1 mini, which is much faster but might hallucinate sometimes, and it's also much cheaper. So how do you do the trade-off? When do you use O3 versus O1? What are the cases you're willing to not have the right response for? So I think that's a mindset switch that has to happen from a deterministic to a probabilistic mode, which I would say is the most important thing that differentiates an AI PM and non-AI PM. And this might be a controversial take, but I feel at least to be an AI PM, you need to have some sort of a technological understanding of things. Not that you have to learn how to write code, but you should have intuitive understanding of how data works and what sort of data can be used. Uh, for example, if you're trying to recommend suggestions based on products, you should be able to make connections like, okay, maybe that's not products, maybe we can also look at browsing history and look
Hmm.
at browsing patterns to come up with suggestions. So it's not technical knowledge, but you need to understand how what the metadata structure is. Are there patterns within that metadata that can be leveraged? So it's slightly beyond what a traditional PM would think about. So I think those are sort of the differences.
Yeah, I think what you said regarding the technology bit is I completely agree with. But a lot of people on the internet, especially, talk about like they sell PM as a kind of a thing where you don't need technical skills to get into PM. But I think with AI, what I've seen is, especially when you deal with data, what type of data and evals, especially trade-offs, you have to be a bit technical. You have to understand a bit of statistics to actually understand what is going on with these models, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
You can maybe
And
get into PM, but you won't be able to thrive as a AI PM if you're. technology is bad.
Correct. Yep. Agreed. And I think that brings me to my next point where you mentioned like how people can become an AIPM. What is the differentiation between a PM and AIPM? But if I had to say like the best of the best AIPMs, like the top 5%, top 1% of AIPMs, what do they look like? What are they building right now? How do they differentiate themselves? And how can one become a like top 1% AIPM in the world, in India, whatever? Because you have been in this space, you have
Yeah.
been building AI copilots for the last 10 years.
Yeah. So to be the top 1% of an AIPM definitely means you're doing things which no one else is doing in terms of not just day-to-day actions, but even in product sense and thinking through what's possible. So I think what differentiates them is they have a very deep understanding of how machine learning fundamentally works, which
Hmm.
is what sort of data can I use to get which kind of insights. So they're able to go beyond, okay, my customers have these problems and these are the features. A simple AI PM would say, okay, these are my features. How can I use AI to improve these features or build a better version of them? Whereas a top 1% AI PM would be saying, this is the data that my customers have given me, and these are the problems in their life. I can use a combination of this data to pull out this insight for them. So you're thinking beyond the current use cases of what's possible, and that's only you can only do it if you fundamentally understand how machine learning works. So do you understand that I can take text, I can do similarity of text, and then try to identify trends and patterns from within that text? Do you and do you exactly understand what sort of text is needed, what sort of cleaning is needed? So you can have those conversations with your machine learning team and AI team to say, hey, we have this data, customers face this problem, can we pull out these sort of insights? I think that's what differentiates people who have maybe some understanding of AI and people who actually understand AI at a very intuitive level, which is a hard skill to have. I think I would argue not even a lot of AI engineers might be having that. If you look at the broad spectrum, you might know how a model works, you might be able to code up a model, but to have a deep understanding of, okay, this is why it's working and this is how it's working, that's what differentiates not just the top AI VMs, but the top people in AI versus everyone else.
I think another good example is when we, let's say, just a very quick use case would be you're writing a cold email based on thousands of cold emails that has been trained, right? And you see the response, you see the examples that have been put in, and you start to realize that okay, this line is happening because the model behaves in this way because of this pattern.
Yeah,
This is how the tokenization works for this particular model. Maybe O3 is hallucinating here in this particular aspect, but maybe Claude is able to take this personalization better, but it's not able to obey instructions very properly. And when you get deeper into like testing all of these models, working with these models, you truly understand that okay, now I'm getting the hang of AIPM.
yeah,
I think you must have also had similar interactions with like when you work in service, so you must have used RAG and all of that.
yeah.
So like evaluating various RAG systems, I must have had those kind of problems that you had to solve, right?
Yeah. So simple things, right? Like there could be a traditional thing which is not which is solved not through RAG, but through some sort of a probabilistic model, right? Like some sort of a cause sine cause fitting on the model, and it's just a very generic, let's say, a classification model, for example.
Hmm.
It's been it's a standard classifier model, but it's not been performing very well. The top AI PMs can come in and say, hey, the classifier is wrong because maybe there's something wrong with the underlying data, but there's some other data here which has a correlation with these.
Right.
Maybe we do a RAG there, do a RAG and then do classification on top of that, and then
Right.
we get better accuracy. So if you can make these connections and have these discussions with AI PMs, that's what sort of differentiates.
Awesome. Like I think before starting, people might not understand what RAG is. If you could just quickly explain what is RAG.
So, okay, I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. It's RAG
Yeah.
stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So think of it like search on steroids. So search typically works using some metadata, some pre-structured metadata. But in a RAG, you can take any sort of unstructured data, build embeddings around it, and then use what are called retrieval models to search based on these indexes. Uh, I'll not go
Again,
deep into. Embeddings are an
embeddings,
example.
but that would be complex words. Can you just simplify a little further, like what are embeddings, maybe, or maybe simplify the definition of RAG a bit more as well? People who are, so my audience is primarily people who are not that technical, maybe
Yeah.
aspiring PMs, might be in college, early into their careers, might not know this. So if you could
So I'll
simplify that, that would
explain
be great.
what an embedding means in a very simple form. So, but
Yeah,
before you understand embeddings, you have to understand vectors.
yeah.
Uh, okay, I'll give you the best explanation I got from an engineer in a very non-technical way. If you had to take any text in the world, you can think of it in multiple sort of what's called dimensions in machine learning terms, but in simple terms, multiple factors. Like if there's a word like, let's say, uh, car, you can say car is of a type which is a vehicle. Car is a non-living thing, which is another sort of factor.
Hmm.
Car is of a certain size, is made of a certain metal. So you can have all these different factors, which are dimensions, what's called a dimension. So now you can assume you have a list of all these factors. So it's a car, it's a vehicle, it's a non-living thing. It's of a certain metal, it's of a certain size. So you'll have some way to encode all of this with some number or some data. That essentially is a vector for a car. And the larger the vector you have, the more deeper your model understands what that thing is. What embeddings do is they take all these vectors and they sort of put them in a three-dimensional or okay, put them in an n-dimensional space where things which are similar are closer in terms of their vector. So you can easily see this, right? Like if we think of a very simple vector of a car as a vehicle, non-living of a certain size, and then you have another vector for bus, which is again it's a vehicle, it's a non-living thing, but it's of a different size. So if and then there's a vector of human and an elephant. Human is a living thing, uh, it's a mammal and of a certain size. And then there's elephant, which is a mammal, a living
Hmm.
thing of a larger size. So now if I have to say what is a human to elephant, and then what the car is to the, now you can see how the third factor of the vector, which is size, now is saying, okay, maybe it's a truck. So
Right.
that's what an embedding really does. It helps ML understand. It helps you encode the relationships in a mathematical sort of format. I hope it was not very complex.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, it was actually perfect to explain what a vector is, then an embedding. And I think lastly, you could complete this by actually saying a use case of RAG, or maybe a few use cases of what RAG can do.
okay, simple use case for RAG, which all of us have used, is when you search something on Google. Earlier, it only used to give you web pages.
Hmm.
Now it gives you an actual answer and an excerpt of that content, right? That's RAG. Because what they're doing is
Right.
instead of just looking at the words in the text, they sort of created embeddings of what these models are and what different factors of this data is. For example, you could ask questions like, when was Steve Jobs born? Traditional search will give you a Wikipedia page of Steve Jobs. But now because they're doing RAG, they have an embedding of all these pages. They're able to specifically pull out the part of the vector which makes the most sense, and then do some generative AI on top of that and say, okay, Steve Jobs was born on so and so page. They're retrieving the
Correct.
document, then doing generative AI on top of it and augmenting it. So it's retrieval augmented generation.
Awesome. I think that is perfectly explained. I think one important point that you also touched by was that how people are like AI PMs will have to work with researchers and data scientists, and I think that is another key differentiator between, let's say, traditional PM and an AI PM. And that is something that I have seen a few people really like get troubled by. That okay, how do I work with these researchers who know so much? So, what will advise to those kind of PMs who want to become AI PMs, have become AI PMs, or maybe on the transition path, and how can they start working with researchers and AI engineers?
Yeah. So I would say two things to keep in mind. Uh, Nobody likes a know-it-all, and everybody likes to talk about their work. So if you keep these
Yeah.
two principles in your mind, you can work with not just AI researchers, but anyone. So don't go into these conversations saying, hey, I know my product, I know my users, so this is
Hmm.
what I want. Go in with curiosity of, okay, I don't understand AI as well as you do, but here's the problem, here's the data, and here's my suggestion. Can we do something with this? Uh, and also ask them what sort of models they think they can use. So treat it like a discussion and a experiment, because data scientists and researchers love talking and experimentation. So as long as you're able to go them with an experiment mindset of, okay, I have this data, I have this problem, what sort of experiments, or you can even go into suggestion saying, hey, can we use a RAG here? Do you think that will make sense? Versus, I think I've seen two ends of this. One is where they treat it like normal PM jobs, where they go and tell them, hey, I want to get suggestions for restaurants. I want it to be 98% accuracy. Please build it in next 2 months. And they'll be like,
Mm.
dude, what does that even mean? Or I've seen the other end of the spectrum, where you don't understand anything, where you're like, hey, we want to recommend something. So please look at it and tell me what we can recommend and give me what accuracy we can do it at. So it's the trade-off between both of these, was where just giving them random requirements with very specific things without understanding what it does, and the other place where you're not giving any sort of specifics at all. So just going with the experimentation mindset of, okay, we want to recommend restaurants. Here's the data we have. Here are the patterns. Here's where patterns of restaurant usage lie.
Mm.
Can we use this model? What sort of experiments can we run? What is the accuracy you think we can get to? Have these conversations, and that's how I think you can sort of start working with them. And it definitely helps if you have the underlying knowledge, like if you understand what, because what could happen is a researcher could come and say, hey, I don't know what sort of embeddings to build here. But if you don't understand what an embedding means, it's a very hard conversation from that point. So have baseline understanding of what these things mean, like vectors, embeddings, RAG, so you can have the conversation naturally and don't have them explain everything to you, uh, because they don't want to spoon feed. They have enough things to do on their plate.
Got it. I think that sums it up perfectly. Let's say that you're actually hiring for an AI PM and someone is also reaching out, they're a fresher or maybe in some other field. What are some things that you look for in their resume or maybe in their personality or in their interviews that
Yeah.
immediately makes you tick like, okay, this is the guy. Like because people think like people did very traditional projects earlier, right? They did case studies of Zomato, Swiggy, feature tear downs, product tear downs, all of those things. But what has changed in say 2025, and how should people approach say let's say job hunting in AI product management?
So one thing I definitely look for, and this it's hard to find on resumes, uh, it only comes out in calls, is I ask them, hey, GPT's been around for a while now. What have you done differently? How are you using ChatGPT in your day-to-day life? Doesn't have to be ChatGPT. You could use Claude. I don't care about the company
Hmm.
you're subscribing to.
Hmm.
But how are you using AI in your day-to-day life? And if the answer is I don't really use it that much, then maybe you're a good fit for any other PM, but you're not a good fit for AI PM. Because I'll tell you a good example of this, right? Uh, so again, there's not a candidate I'm not hiring right now, but my wife was preparing for a interview recently because she was switching jobs, and the use case for her was, hey, how do I prepare? Can we use AI for this? She's not in the product world, she's not in the tech world, but she asked the question of how can we use AI? And there was a curious thing, well, okay, let's see what we can do. We started off with, okay, can AI generate some questions? She's in the finance field, so it's harder to find mock interviews and those sort of things, unlike PM and engineering worlds.
Right.
So we got some questions which are very generic, but then we probed the LLMs and then we got, and then my intuitive sense was maybe there's somewhere in the internet where there are mock interviews or interview transcripts that lie around. So we said, we gave it a job description. We said, hey, you're recruiting for this, take my interview. And now she's been practicing interviews with AI being the interviewer. And then sometimes we do it that way, sometimes we flip it around where she's the interviewer and AI is interviewing so that we get both sort of perspectives. So it can be that you can be a designer who's been using, you could be someone who's more design oriented, who's using AI to sort of come up with different variations of design brainstorming. So if you're not used AI in any form, you're not using it at all, that's sort of
Hmm.
a red flag.
Understood. Awesome. I think we are on to the last segment of our podcast where I really want to understand like you've been in this product journey for the last 10 years. So what are some personal growth and like growth strategies that has really helped you like make that shift into like from a normal product manager to a great product manager. And given that you've worked in companies they've been acquired, worked in companies they've been acquired, and now finally in Freshworks, like uh, a lot of people want to do this in the future as well. And how do you actually become a very great product manager? Like, given from your own personal journey, would you like
Yeah.
to talk about that?
I don't know if this is I can give I can give knowledge on how to become a great PM, because I don't know if I can self proclaim to be a great PM. But I'll tell you what's worked well for me in my career. And now thinking back, I think this has been constant throughout my journey, even as a software engineer. I would say it's three things. One is be willing to do the hard things.
Hmm.
That's where the opportunity lies. Uh, if there's time, I'll tell you a story of how I really like it hit me in the head perfectly, where started looking at problems as opportunities.
There's time.
Can I
There's
can I
time. You
take two
can.
minutes to give
Yeah,
you?
absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of time. Don't worry.
Yeah. So in 2016 or 2017, I had gone to this boot camp by MIT,
Hmm.
where this was when I was doing my own startup, Nacer. So they would bring around 50, 60 people from around the world who were running startups, and it was sort of a boot camp for all want to be entrepreneurs, where they would put us through what they call an entrepreneurship boot camp. So they would have people from Sloan, other founders come in and give us guest lectures, and it was a boot camp where we were supposed to build out prototypes of a product. I met a person there who was from Syria, and 2016 Syria was very different. This was when ISIS had just taken over Syria.
Right.
So I was very curious that someone from Syria was there. So I started having a lot of conversations with him. So at that point, he was a 20-year-old guy, who was in middle of his education, was middle of university education, and he had moved to Germany through a boat. If you remember those times, we used to get
Wow.
images of people going from certain place to a different country on
Yes.
boats. So
Yep.
I was curious that that guy was here building a startup, and asked him, "What do you do?" And he had raised funding from Google Ventures at that point. So
Hmm.
what he was doing was, because a lot of lot of kids of his age and his friends were leaving Syria at such a time, their education was stopped because of the abrupt sort of movement they had to make. And it was very hard for them to then go into a new country and start education from scratch. So his startup would tie up with, it was an NGO, they would tie up with universities and schools in Germany, do sort of a
Hmm.
transfer credit program. So they would do an evaluation test for the kid or a college student is coming in, and then let them continue their education in the new place. And some of it would be socially funded through funds, through like fundraising. And that got me thinking, which is no one else in this world could have thought of that startup except for him. And he could have looked at I'm in a war-torn country, my education is gone for a toss as a
Hmm.
problem. But I was like, that was the trigger for him to build that startup. So that sort of was a moment in my head where I thought, okay, there's no problems in life. There's always an opportunity behind it. So I think that sort of mindset has really helped me grow a lot in my career. So look for problems. Like in every company, there's one thing which nobody wants to do, or everybody's sort of putting it away. Try and attack that. Try and go behind that is the sort of strategy that's always worked for me. Second is have high agency. Uh, what that means is don't be restricted by a job title or your job role. Like I'm a product manager, so I write PRDs. I don't do mocks. I don't have. So what would happen is, let's say sometimes there's no design bandwidth, and this works mostly in startups, doesn't work in large companies.
Yeah.
So you can say until I get design bandwidth, I can't do it. Or you could learn Figma, build a mock, and ask the designer to review and make changes on top. Or you can say, hey, you can ask the designer, I know you don't have bandwidth, but I built something based on what you had. Can we just go ahead with this as a beta launch? You want to try out a new idea, there's no engineering bandwidth available. Try to make a prototype of it, code it up, and show it to people to get buy-in. So I've done some of that at Freshworks also, which has helped me grow in my career at Freshworks. Sort of put me in the limelight as well of, okay, when AI came in, people were wondering, okay, can we do something with AI? Is that something possible? So I quickly built a prototype of how you could build a copilot, how you could use AI to create more,
Hmm.
do coding. And that sort of gave me limelight, gave me visibility. And then some of that is in production today and is making money for the company. So
Like, that is
don't,
super interesting. Like, being in Freshworks, you are able to do that. Whereas
Yeah.
people in startup complain that, okay, I don't have bandwidth and all. That speaks about the
It's
differences.
you can do this in Microsoft also. So
Yep.
the Cortana project that I was talking about, right? So I was on a team which I was on the data science team at Microsoft. So we were supposed to do ETLs and reporting on ETL. So ETL reports at that point were like a very bland dashboard. And so a lot of times the product managers and the PMs would question about, okay, how can we make this report more readable? They want more reliability into this. And at that point, I was like, hey, why can't we just use Cortana, which is available? Get it, let the leaders ask questions to Cortana. We have the data set underlying, it can answer. So they said, oh no, this is complex. It's not part of our project. I was like, okay, I'm an engineer. I can build this out. I built it out. We made a small demo. Then I got to demo it to the global leader of our data science
Wow.
team. And then they said, okay, let's put in some more engineers and maybe formalize this and make this available as a dashboard for everyone. I don't know if that was the inspiration for building Cortana into Power BI, but
Oh, yeah.
I
Wow.
wouldn't. I don't think so. I don't think this had anything to do with that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, you can do this. See, if you can do this at Microsoft, you can do this everywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Completely agreed. So you mentioned one point, which is very high agency. I think there's something Shreyas Doshi also talks a lot about.
Yeah.
We're having very high agency. And any other point that you feel like in your 10-year journey that has helped you immensely to make the next jump?
Uh, Third thing I would say is have know how to build relationships. At least in the PM world, relationships go a long way.
Hmm.
So, because there's only so much you can get done through escalations, through planning, and but if you build relationships with your GTM teams, with your engineers, that goes a long mile because when a critical bug comes in on a Friday evening, if you don't have the relationship, the engineer is not going to work on it.
Yep.
He'll say, "Hey, it's not part of my SLA. The SLA is 2 days." But having that relationship helps you pull through in those moments. It could be a deal. It could you might be launching a new feature and you want to talk to a few customers. Uh, it'll take a lot of effort if you don't have connections with your GTM teams who you helped out in the past. And the way to build out this relationship is do things without expecting anything in return. Like if somebody's stuck on a problem and you have time and bandwidth to help them out because these things do come around in the end. It might not be the same person, but someone else will
Hmm.
help you, and that's sort of how you build relationship and trust with other teams in your sort of organization.
Correct. I think lastly, I wanted to just focus a bit more on like agency part. I think that is very interesting what you said. If you could speak a bit about how can one like bring agency. People are most of the people are not like that. Like going out of your way to do something on a weekend,
Yeah.
going out of your way to learn Figma, going out of your way to use Cursor and build something up. Most people don't do that. So how can someone, let's say, build more agency in a product management role?
Okay, that's a hard question. I think how would you build this? It's a good question. I think it starts with being curious.
Hmm.
Try to question things on, okay, anytime I look at a new product, I think about, okay, what must the PM be thinking? Why do they build it this way? What else can be done? Uh, and also, so once you start being curious, you'll start questioning a lot of things. And then you'll be like, okay, why can't this be that way? Why can't we make changes? And second thing is to then realize that you have a lot of power to change things. At least in the current world, you don't need to know a lot of technical stuff as well. So I'll give you a very simple example, right? Recently that happened. So the new tax that got announced on budget,
Yep.
I was just watching it live on TV. I was very confusing, this whole 12 lakhs thing, but
Yeah.
uh, so like, wait, this is too confusing. If I find it confusing, everybody else is also finding it confusing. It would be so good to have a calculator for this, right? So you could then start questioning, okay, why doesn't a calculator exist? What will it take to build a calculator?
Hmm.
Traditionally, you would have like no, you'd have to know how to write code, and then I went to Claude. I said, hey, this is the old tax lab, this is the new tax lab, this is what the rule is. Can you give me a calculator? It built me a calculator. Uh, like it took 2 minutes, and
Yeah.
I could share it along with my friends and family, and I say, hey, you guys can you no longer have to be confused. Just enter your salary, enter which regime you want. It'll tell you what tax you're going to be paying and how much you're going to save. So sort of have that curiosity of, okay, what does this mean? How can we have a calculator? Why doesn't it exist? And it's also like a drug in a way. Once you start creating
Hmm.
things, and you get the joy out of it,
Correct. Yeah.
it's something that keeps you hooked. I enjoy creating things. Uh, so I don't know what I'd be doing if not for this career. Probably
I
be
think
cooking.
that. Oh, you like cooking?
I think it's very similar to creating. It's closest
Ah,
thing to creating, right?
yep. Waiting for a model which can cook for us.
Yeah.
I think that would be great. But yeah, I think what you said about building projects, like just simply building a tax lab calculator, is something that AI PMs, like aspiring PMs, can also do for their resumes. Like a very
Yeah.
simple use case, but it's so useful. And what I also talk about a lot is when you're building a project, build something that people will actually use, not a Netflix clone or an Amazon
Yeah.
clone or something, but people something that people will actually use. You can get actual customers and you can get actual revenues, and that recruiters love that. Absolutely, that
Yeah.
okay, you have done that thing. You have actually shown that okay, you have what it takes to be a product manager.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be revenue also, right? I'll give you an example. When I was staying in Bombay, we had a very weird rule in our flat. It was four of us, but we would split the rent by the number of days you were at home. Because the argument was most of us would be traveling. So if I'm not at home, why should I pay for? Yeah. Because
Yeah,
imagine the math complication we had to go through. We will come with some like I'm not there for 5 days, I'm not there for 6 days.
yeah.
And I was like, dude, this is too much math to sit and do. Let me just build a small web page where all of us can enter our number of days and it'll calculate. It's a very simple product. No one in the world will use it, but it was super useful for us.
Wow, that's awesome. I think only in Bombay, right? The rent is the way you got to do that. Early days, I believe,
Yeah.
from bachelor early days, right?
Yeah, this was 3 years, 3, 4 years back when I was in Haptech.
Got it. All right, Akshay, I think thank you so much for this amazing podcast. It was really great to having you here and hope you had a great time as well.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed the conversation. It was genuinely fun.
All right.